Hello, my name is Julianne. I'm an astrologer. And in this video, I want to focus on the sign of Cancer, especially since 2008. And that is because I've been really still chewing on Capricorn, which is the opposite sign of Cancer. Capricorn is the focus of so much right now in the world at large, in the astrological community, just because of Pluto's passage through Capricorn since 2008 and for the next 2 months. Now, in 2 months, Pluto won't enter Capricorn again. For anyone on Earth right now will not experience Pluto returning to the sign of Capricorn again. So it's truly the end of an era. It's the end of a generation. And I've spoken to this idea of Pluto in other videos, but as I try to chew on Pluto right now, as Pluto is back in the sign of Capricorn, and we are kind of really rounding out this this huge chapter of our lives since 2008, I'm continually brought back into my emotional body, continually brought back into my feeling body, reflecting on my family, reflecting on my own sense of home, places where I feel not at home within myself, within the world, places where I'm able to meet my emotional body, places where I'm not. And it's truly so overwhelming. Um, and what that points to, there's a few things for me that come up when I reflect on this. Because firstly, I should say my attempt to reflect on this is out of a deep desire for me to understand Capricorn right now, to understand all of the Pluto work that has been happening, which is to say all the changes that have happened in life since 2008, which has been a tremendous amount. You know, I was born in 1996, and so in 2008, I was just over 10 years old. I was 12, right? But it was right around that time where the most significant thing in my life kind of happened that set me on the track to be where I am right now. And without evaluating that from a positive, negative, or good or bad scenario, the overwhelming feeling that I have right now is a profound sadness. It's so, it's a sadness that comes with recognizing that sometimes all the work that we put in for over a decade, whether we're conscious of it or not, is to play out life scenarios and to move on from them instead of being carefully planning out life, because life can be planned out and life will work in the way that we think it will. So much has changed for so many people in the last 15 years that life does not necessarily add up in the way that we were taught. And I think a lot of people focus on that idea that things don't line up in the way they're supposed to. And as an astrologer, I tend to just come to an understanding of things naturally as I live through them. And I have a great deal of just intuitive, almost telepathic, just knowing and understanding. I don't call it channeling myself because I think it is just me. It's the same energy, but I digress. I would love to be able to package Pluto's, final stay in Capricorn and really put bookends over the last 15 years. But can't yet. And every time I come to try to understand, I'm brought into my emotional body. And what that immediately makes me remember is the Pluto polarity point in the sign of Cancer. Pluto as a planet and these huge changes that have happened in the world, whether you're tracking them astrologically or not, the way that we recognize them is usually in the opposite energy of where they show up. Now, so consider this is a story from my life. So Pluto in Capricorn, right? Pluto is transformation, deepest soul desire, which correlates to power and the most impersonal destructive processes that can happen in order to push the soul, push society towards evolution. That's Pluto. Death, rebirth, but on a soul level. And so in Pluto, we're not just killing off people, we're killing off the deepest identification we have with ourself that even goes beyond our current identity structure. In Capricorn, this is about the systems that make up the world we live in, the foundations of our world, of our civil society, internationally, globally, which speaks to most generally governments, banks, and generally the patriarchy. And these systems of power that we all work with and work within. So Pluto moving through that sign, moving through those archetypes, has been so deeply transforming or showing where we are ripe for transformation within these archetypes, systems of power, and it's essentially just systems of power. Systems being Capricorn, power being Pluto. Frameworks of power. You use that, go anywhere you want with it. Again, banks, governments, corporations, schools, patriarchal lineages. Ancestral lineages also. It can also be matriarchal lineages, but Capricorn itself is a much more, it leans towards the patriarchy, towards the masculine, towards the father, more than the mother, which would be Cancer, which is what I'm trying to bring this back to, yeah? Because Cancer is the opposition point to Pluto. And so in any polarity is the terminology used by Jeffrey Wolf Green in evolutionary astrology. Wherever the opposite of Pluto is, whether that's in transit or in your birth chart, this is where we are able to integrate the work that Pluto is actually doing on the opposite side. Integration always happens in the emotional body. And it just so happens that in Cancer, which is the opposite of Capricorn, Cancer is the sign of the emotional body. So over the last, since 2008, we have been integrating the total rebirth of systems of power. We're integrating those changes by also integrating the fact that we have an emotional body and that emotional body is part and parcel of the systems of power. These two things are inextricable. Despite the emotional body being very nonlinear, very irrational at times, there is a complete logic to it and any emotional expression that literally makes the rational possible. They cannot exist without each other. And as the polarity point since 2008, Cancer, the emotional body, has been forced, or rather met with such intense impulses, impetuses, reasons that it must recognize itself for what it is. And the story that I was going to say is this terminology of emotional labor, which I'm sure you might have heard about. If not, it's the idea that, when you are showing up for someone emotionally, you are doing labor in the same way as someone who is showing up to do a more quote unquote rational job that you get paid for. Emotional labor is a little bit more difficult to pin down, to monetize, to value. Of course, we have things like therapy and even astrological consultations, anything, body work, massages, all of these things that work directly on the body are also working on emotional experience, including, again, I said it, psychology, but, oftentimes these roles, the emotional caretaking roles, are being played by the feminine in our lives, whether that's our mothers, other women in our life, or folks who are more naturally empathetic and attuned. But what happens is that and structurally speaking, for the last, not even since just 2008, but for several decades, even centuries, women and those of us who are naturally empathetic, naturally attuned to emotional experience, and can thus work through them and hold space for it, are not being valued, have not historically been valued, and been exchanged for the same labor that, let's say, a man who goes into the office to work is being exchanged money to have that labor done. Now, I'm not the person to go into the politics or the academics of this. It's not that I don't study this, but I'm pointing it out as a very clear reflection of this polarity point between Cancer and Capricorn. Cancer being the emotional body and emotional labor, and then Capricorn being rational labor, or whatever you want to call the opposite of emotional labor is. And now that we're nearing the end of this transit of Pluto and Capricorn, I think very, very, very few people, or rather, I should just say, many, many more people in the world have come to an understanding of the value of emotional labor. And that is because Cancer, as an archetype of home, of the emotional body, of nurturing, of caring, of literal life-giving, of the womb, has been somewhat forced to bring itself into the light and say, this is my value. This is where you are able to process all of the changes that have been happening in the world. And you need to respect that. There needs to be an understanding that without space and understanding for nonlinearity, for emotionality, we cannot progress linearly in the world. They are two sides of the same coin. I think the reason it's so on my mind at this moment is because we have Mars in Cancer, and Mars is very leading edge of our evolution. Mars is where we are taking action and saying, this is what I need to do right now, so I'm doing it. And in Cancer, the actions that I'm speaking to here are emotional. The actions are letting our emotional body express itself. That can mean a whole host of things. But on the one hand, it can be incredibly emotionally expressive. It can be like there's finally an opening into one's emotional body that can now be expressed. And depending on how you have worked with that, it can come out in many, many different ways. There can be an immense amount of any emotion, anger, sadness, love, Anything that has been repressed, Mars in Cancer comes to open it up surgically and say, here, time to come out and play. Not only that, but Mars is eventually moving towards an opposition to Pluto at that final degree of Capricorn before Mars moves into Leo. And the catch is Mars will retrograde. Mars will move retrograde and go back into Cancer. And in a few days from now, so by the end of September, Mars will be in its shadow period, which is to say, Mars will be beginning to cover the territory. It will make 3 passes over, or rather 2 more passes over, up until around February of 2025. So we are in this period of straightening out how we take action on our emotional bodies and the emotions that we just allow to move through us. Not regardless, not despite, but because of the linearity, because of the Capricornian, straightforward, easily understood frameworks that we now need to rely on, because of how much pressure this final push of Pluto and Capricorn is putting on the frameworks that we are trying to rely upon. The emotional body needs to respond in kind, which again can present a whole variety of different responses. But to say the least, it is an emotional time. And I am a Cancer sun, Cancer Mercury. I've got a whole lot of Cancer people in my family. And this has truly been one of the most intense periods. I think it's because not only in Cancer are we opening up, with Mars in Cancer especially, with this polarity point, there are not only the backlog of emotional data, emotional energy that we haven't expressed ourselves in our own lifetimes, but there's also the emotional data of other lifetimes. There's the emotional data of our ancestry. In Cancer, it's all about our ancestry, all about the energies, the patterns that we've inherited. Now, with Mars in Cancer, we are so tempted to take action on our emotional bodies, to take action on our sadness, to take action on our anger. And that's fine. Do it. There's this idea of exhaustion in astrology that's like you need to do it in order to learn. So just know that with Mars in Cancer, the other way to think about things is that our very actions are also determining our emotional body at this time. So it doesn't just work one way. We work it the other way. We can choose to channel our emotions physically in the world instead of needing the emotions to inwardly hurt us or hurt other people. We can channel that into exercise, into virtually any other thing. Mars is really any action. And so the emotionality at this time is just really profound. It's very far reaching. We're going to be in it for the next few months. But I think the reason I wanted to speak in this way is just to let myself be aware, let whoever wants to hear be aware that in order to have rationality, linearity, structures that are actually helpful to the world at large, we also need to have emotional awareness. We need to have nonlinear experience and respect this more subtle realities of life, because they go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. Even if you think you're so focused on one, there is a counterpart at play in your life, whether you're aware of it or not. So bringing this, just shedding some light, putting some respect on both of these characteristics right now, I felt very called to do so just in my own life. partially because I'm feeling such a profound amount of sadness. You know, I'm not letting it really show here, but I can't tell you the depth to which I have felt loss in my life, cry, um, consistently since 2008, and how I've come into the practice of astrology, of meditation, of these spiritual, creative, romantic, the whole world of the subtle body. I have been so deeply led into it. It is my own strength, but I think it is also a deeply sensitive place to be. And it is also not a place that is so easy to be confident in the world that we are in, for the most part. And especially at these times where, whether people are aware of it or not, I think we are all tapped into a deeply, deeply sensitive, penetrative, cutting into a core emotional dynamics in our lives. And the biggest advice I have for myself is truly just to breathe. Meet the emotion with breath. Don't rationalize it away. Don't let it consume you, but be with it. Breathe with it. Breathe into it and express in the most healthy way possible for yourself. So I hope this might have been helpful to anyone also feeling a lot. And just, it can also be interesting just to impress upon us this idea of the Pluto polarity point. And I'll be speaking to much greater length, I think, about the Pluto polarity point once Pluto moves back into Aquarius for good, because the polarity point then becomes Leo. And we shift from a lunar polarity point, an emotional polarity point, into a solar polarity point, with Leo being ruled by the sun. So it is our very sense of creative identity that will be the site of our integrating the fact that our collective consciousness, Aquarius, is going to be so profoundly changed over the next 20 years. So in that perspective, it's a very, very interesting conversation, but I implore myself and you to meet the emotional body as deeply as you can in these times. Find the support that you need to do so, but also stay with yourself and use the breath. Use whatever outlet, share where you can, but own it and breathe into it. So that's all. Thank you so much. Let me know what you think. Would love to hear how we're all doing. So that's all for now.